Today on Verbal to Visual, sketchnotes of Debbie Millman's wonderful podcast, Design Matters, with guest Erin McKeown. For these sketchnotes, I've decided to go with the flowchart approach, heavy on containers and connectors, light on visuals. This is one of my favorite ways to approach real-time sketchnoting because I'm less likely to get caught up in drawings and can instead focus on the flow of ideas and the connections between them. So let's get into it. First up, my sketchnotes alongside audio highlights from the podcast, the full episode of which I've linked below, then a bit of reflection.
You've said that the narrative structure that influences you most is biography, the order of a life, making sense of a life lived, and you've said, I will always be interested in childhoods, family, and growing older.
You know, it's that question of what do you do with middle-class kids in the summertime? So I definitely did a lot of like a swim team and pool, but then it was like camp. What camp are you going to? And I went to a science camp called Nature Camp. Not a very original name, but a very special place in the Shenandoah Valley. And I went there for the next 8 summers and really found myself there. And that was a science camp, but also had like kickball and camper talent night and counselor talent night and lots of hikes. And I loved it. I had my favorite friends there. I felt like I was mostly myself there. And I thought I'd be a scientist because of that. But it is also ironically where I learned to play music.
You said that idols and heroes are important teachers and that growing up, the music you loved most was the music that helped you feel more than you were capable of feeling on your own. And I loved that. You felt that music was more vulnerable and angrier than you were, music that made you imagine yourself on stage when, as you put it, in real life, that seemed impossible. Why did it seem impossible?
Part of it comes from class, like a aspirational middle classness of my family of trying to contain and sort of fit into a more rigid idea of like family and emotions, I think. And also just, I don't think I had a lot of models for how to feel any of those things, like beyond the boundaries of what felt acceptable. And I think that's also true for a lot of people. Honestly, like I think that's what music and art does for a lot of people is help them understand things and feel things that they maybe don't have practice with. I mean, I would say like 99.9% of why I share my music with the world is validation. You know, like, I mean, I could just keep it to myself, really, but there's some impulse to show it to people in that validation, just to be like, hey, I'm here, do you hear me? And so something like that was one of the first echoes back that said like, we hear you.
Yeah.
You know, we hear you. And it gave me some confidence. And at that time, I wouldn't really play music in front of people, but it was definitely like, maybe you could get up in front of your school and play a song of yours. We wanted to get women around campus who were writing things to be on the CD for the spread. And I volunteered to help with that, and I got a recorder from the Media Lab, you know, like a hard disk recorder and a stereo mic, and started going around recording just people that I knew around campus. And so I recorded myself as well. And that was my first recording. And there was a house that I lived in that had a really great sounding bathroom, like a really great sounding bathroom. So I kept like borrowing the recorder from the Media Lab and setting up in the bathroom of,
Very cowboy
of my
junkies.
house. Yeah, setting up in the bathroom of my house and just recording myself for hours.
You regard the act of singing, though, as the most intimate and vulnerable a thing a musician can do.
Singing is still a mystery to me. And for me, it is tied to childhood. It is tied to the very essence of wanting to be heard and not feeling like you're being heard and having to use that voice. And it just is completely metaphorical and physical at the same time. And when I talk about using my voice, I really mean like both my agency as a person and the like technical muscle in my mouth. For me, it's completely tied up to my perspective on childhood and being seen, and it's fundamental.
How do you write a song?
You hope. That's what I think. This is what I tell my songwriting students. I'll give you a little talk I give to them, which is songs are not precious. And if you come at songwriting from that perspective, you're going to be fine. And then the other thing I say is that it's like fishing. And I didn't come up with this metaphor. I believe I heard it from my friend Mary Gaucher, who is a wonderful singer-songwriter that I met in Boston, who now lives in Nashville, sort of in that world. But I remember her saying one time that it's like fishing, And so think about how you fish. You have to choose the right spot. You have to have the right tools. You have to be patient. But some days you're not going to catch a fish, even though you're in the right place at the right time. And then when you do catch one, you have to take care of it. And you have to nurture it, and you have to bring it out of the water in the right way. And that's how you do it. Maybe underneath your question is that question of like, do the words come first? Do the music come first?
It was really more about how does the idea come into you?
There's 100 different ways. I've had songs that come to me in dreams. I heard them and I saw them, and I just had to wake up and write them down. And I mean, that's crazy, and that's a gift, and I'm always thankful for it. But not many come like that. And there's songs that come from conversations. I would say songs that I wrote for the musical came from conversations with my collaborator, very specific conversations like wouldn't it be fun if we had this kind of song, and at the beginning we need to think about this, and at the end we need to think about this, and so they're like a crossword puzzle or something like that. You fill in the blanks. Then you have songs that just come because you feel like you can't help but write them. I mean, I've literally been standing in my kitchen waiting for a cup of tea to go, and I'm just noodling on the guitar, and then I just hear something, and I'm like, okay. You know what I mean? And again, it's like fishing. You just have to know, you have to recognize when the little spark has started. Yeah, and I guess, let's go back to the beginning, though, and say the main thing, a song just happens because you're in the right place and you've prepared.
All right, let's chat about how that went. First ideas, then process. The overall impact of this conversation is that it refueled my desire to one day explore writing and playing music myself. It does scare me though, the thought of making music, specifically using my voice. So I definitely resonated with that being the most intimate and vulnerable act of a musician. The connection to childhood though is a piece that hadn't occurred to me. But it makes sense, especially considering how quiet of a kid I was and how introverted I am now as an adult. And for now, I think that these videos are my version of, hey, I'm here. Do you hear me? And maybe that might be enough. Thankfully, even if I never jump into making music, there are plenty of lessons here that extend beyond the writing of songs. Replace songs with sketchnotes and these notes still ring true. Particularly, I love that combination of songs not being precious and that creating them is like fishing. I think that approaching any creative act with those two ideas in mind will be helpful. Don't put any individual thing you make up on a pedestal. Don't be precious about it. That exact point made it into a 5 tips for new sketchnoters video that I made 3 years ago. Instead, approach the process like fishing. Show up with the right equipment to a place that has potential, and put in the time searching and working for that next catch. Finally, I just wanted to highlight the fact that art of any kind can expand what you think you can feel and be. That's one of the reasons that I enjoy podcasts so much, especially those with great hosts like Debbie Millman. First of all, they make you feel things and a whole range of emotions, not just a single one. And they open the door to possibilities and ways of being in the world that you might have come to think are impractical or even impossible. That's why I continue to listen to conversations like these and sketchnote them whenever I can. Speaking of sketchnoting, let's talk now about process. I very much enjoyed the flowchart format. This approach is the one that results in the smallest amount of anxiety on my part, and that's why I enjoy it for real-time sketchnoting. Now that lack of imagery might make it a little less sticky in my brain if I try to recall the entire conversation in the future, but in this case that's not my goal. Instead, it's being able to look at these notes that I've taken and follow the flow, quickly retracing the ideas that I most want to remember. I think it's also worth pointing out that these notes show only pieces of just the first half of the conversation, so be sure to check out the second half to see where it goes from here. Thanks for following along here with my, at times, meandering interests. I hope that no matter what topics I'm exploring and sharing, you're at least seeing some examples of how you might apply a more visual form of note-taking to whatever it is that you're working on. For more support in that realm, check out verbaltovisual.com, where we've got a whole library of online courses to help you develop and use your sketchnoting skills. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Till then.